Okay, the following is a video for section 3.2, parallel lines cut by a transversal. What you see here is that I have a parallel line here, and I'm going to go ahead and call this line AB, okay? And then I'm going to call this line down here CD. All right, and AB is parallel to CD. They're both just horizontal lines with a slope of 0. Now I have this other line here, EF, okay? And EF is my transversal, okay? It's just cutting these two parallel lines. And I want to note that we have an intersection point of CD and EF at point G, and then I have an intersection of those lines for EF and AB at point H. Now what I want to do is I'm going to measure all of these different angles that are formed, and we're going to look at the relationships between those. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and measure. Well, let me select those points. So angle AHF, if I measure that angle, that's what I get. I'm going to put that angle measure right here. All right. I'm going to go ahead and then measure FHB and measure that angle, and that angle is 55.6 or 0.06. All right. Now I'm going to do the same thing down here, angle AHG, and I'm going to measure that, and we should get something interesting. Oh, look, I get that this angle is 55.06, the same as this angle. Okay, and the reason why those angles have the same measure is because they're vertical angles. And if they're vertical angles, then they're congruent. So you can maybe guess what I'm going to get over here for BHG. So let me go ahead and measure that angle, BHG. And if I measure that, oh look, I get 124.94. So I get the same thing here because these two angles are vertical. Okay, now the one thing I want to do is I want to measure all of these angles, and we should get something similar to what we have up here. Okay, so let me go ahead and select points C, G, H and measure that angle. And so I get, oh wow, I get 124.94. That's interesting because it's the same angle as that, it's the same angle as this, and it's the same down here. So I'm going to bet that if this is 124.94, that this angle down here is 55.06. Let's just try and see if that's what we get. So HGD, if I measure that angle, I'm also going to get 55.06. Okay, and so if these two angles are vertical, I'm going to bet that CGE has a measure of 55.06, and sure enough it does. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and take E, G, and D, and I'm going to bet that that's 124.94. Let's measure that, and boom, that's what we get. So we have all these angle measures that are formed, okay? Now, I want to just quickly show you something. If I can move, look what happens if I move point H. Okay, all those angle measures change, but notice how the vertical angles, wherever I change it, my vertical angles remain the same. Okay, and then they also remain the same down here. It doesn't really matter. If I move point E, okay, I'm going to end up getting the same thing. They're all just going to change together. They're all going to be the same thing. Okay, now I want to talk about these two angles here. All right, this angle here is in the top left corner of this intersection point of these two lines, and this angle is in the top left corner of these two intersection lines. Now notice how these are congruent. These angles here are corresponding angles. Okay, now I could say that this angle and this angle are in the top right corner of each of those intersections, and those are also corresponding. Okay, so corresponding angles corresponding angles are in the same position, okay, so, or the same location, okay, and they are congruent, okay? So if you have corresponding angles, they're in the same location and they're congruent, all right? Now I want to talk about this angle here and this angle here. Now those angles are, and let me type something in here. I'm going to type in here that this is my interior, okay, in between the two parallel lines. It's inside, it's the interior. Up here, this is the exterior, all right? And then down here, I'm going to call this the exterior. All right. Now, one thing we need to notice here is that I've got this angle and this angle. I'm sorry, AHF and the measure of angle EGD. Now, those angles are both on the exterior and they alternate over the transversal. So I'm going to call those lines alternate exterior. Okay? And those angles are, they alternate over the transversal and they are congruent. Okay? Now, the other ones I want to talk about are these inside ones. So if I take angle AHG and angle HGD, we notice that those are congruent. Okay, and those are also alternating over the transversal, but they're on the interior. So I'm going to call those alternate interior. And those alternate over the transversal, and they are congruent. All right. Now, let's just take a look at the last few. So we've got corresponding angles. We have alternate exterior, alternate exterior, alternate interior. And we notice that the, I highlighted a few of them. You can assume that the other ones are also, so this is alternate interior. These two angles are alternate interior. And these two angles here are alternate exterior. But now I want to talk about these two angles here. Okay, and in the book it says consecutive interior angles. Consecutive interior. And those angles are on the same side of the transversal, and they are supplementary. Okay, so I want to do something. All right, I'm going to take these two angles, these consecutive interior angles, and show you that they're supplementary. You can kind of look at those numbers and say, okay, if I take 57.94 and add it to 122.06, if I add those together, I'll get 180. Okay, now here's the thing. You can just automatically know that these two angles here are supplementary because they form a linear pair. Okay, but these two angles don't. Now what we know is that these angles are corresponding so that they're congruent. Okay, we've established that. But then we have to say, all right, well, if this angle is congruent to this, and I know that this angle and this angle add to 180, then these two angles have to add to 180. All right, so I'm going to take this angle, and if I add it to that angle, let me measure, oh man, this isn't going to be good. Well, in any case, if I take this measure here, if I, well, I think you get the idea. I'll see if I can figure out how to add those up later and show you that they actually add to 180. but you know that these two angles are supplementary. All right, so they add to 180 because they form a linear pair, and this angle and this angle are congruent, so these two angles would have to add to 180. So it's pretty unique stuff, and you're able to, because you know that they're congruent, and they are supplementary, you can solve pretty much any equation in any situation just by knowing all these facts. So I hope that this helps. I hope that you're able to understand what I'm doing here, and hopefully this allows you to do the homework and the worksheet that are due. So thank you.